This wasn't supposed to happen. These were kids' movies. So why do so many people still remember them? Like nightmares? What did filmmakers hide inside family-friendly stories that no one warned us about? In this video, you'll see the exact scenes that shocked an entire generation, moments that looked harmless, until they weren't. And one of them? It changed how kids saw movies forever. But no one talks about it. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, 1984. It doesn't begin like a nightmare. It begins like adventure, fast, thrilling, almost playful. But then something shifts. The colors darken. The tone tightens. And before you realize it, you're watching a man held down as his still beating heart is ripped from his chest while he's alive. For a film tied to a beloved franchise, marketed to families, this moment crossed a line few expected. And it didn't stop there. Child slavery, ritual sacrifice, hypnotized victims, it all unfolds with a seriousness that feels far removed from the light escapism audiences were promised. For kids watching, this wasn't just intense, it was confusing, because it blurred the line between heroism and horror in a way that lingered long after the credits rolled. This is the kind of scene that doesn't just scare you in the moment, it rewires how you trust movies. You go in expecting excitement and leave realizing that not everything labeled adventure is safe. And that realization, for many, started right here. Labyrinth, 1986. At first glance, it feels whimsical. Music, puppets, strange creatures, it all looks like something designed to spark imagination. But beneath that surface, there's an unease that quietly builds with every scene. The world doesn't follow logic. Faces appear where they shouldn't, voices echo from nowhere, and at the center of it all is a villain who doesn't behave like one. He's calm, charming, unpredictable. That unpredictability is what unsettles you, because you never quite understand the rules of this world or his intentions. For a child, that lack of structure creates a deeper kind of fear. Not loud, not sudden, but constant. It's the feeling that something isn't right, even if you can't explain why. And that's what makes this film so effective. It doesn't rely on obvious scares. It traps you in a dream that slowly turns against you. You keep watching, trying to make sense of it, but the deeper you go, the more it slips out of reach. And by the end, what stays with you isn't just the story. It's the unsettling feeling that you were never fully in control. The Land Before Time, 1988. This was supposed to be gentle, a story about friendship, growth, and survival in a prehistoric world. And for a while, it is exactly that. Bright landscapes, innocent characters, a sense of wonder that feels safe. But then it happens, without warning, without preparation, a moment so sudden and so final that it hits harder than anything else on this list. Littlefoot's mother doesn't just disappear, she dies. And not off-screen, not softened. It's direct, emotional, and impossible to ignore. For many children, this was their first encounter with loss. Real loss. The kind that doesn't get reversed by the end of the movie. And what makes it even more powerful is what follows. The silence, or the confusion, the lonely journey forward without the one figure who made everything feel safe. It teaches something profound, but it teaches it too early. Because kids don't come to movies like this expecting grief. They come for comfort, and instead, they leave with a feeling they can't quite process. That's why this moment never fades. It wasn't just sad, it was a turning point. The Secret of NIMH, 1982. It looks like a simple animated story about a small, fragile mouse trying to save her family. That's the promise. That's what draws you in. But almost immediately, something feels heavier. The colors are darker. The atmosphere is tense. And then the violence begins. Not cartoon violence, real, sudden, brutal moments that feel completely out of place for something labeled family-friendly. Blades clash. Our characters suffer. And death isn't hidden. It's acknowledged, felt, and sometimes unavoidable. What makes this film especially unsettling is its emotional weight. Every decision carries consequences. Every danger feels real. There's no safety net, no guarantee that things will turn out okay. For a child, that kind of storytelling is overwhelming, because it removes the one thing kids rely on most in movies, the certainty that everything will be fine. Instead, it replaces it with uncertainty, fear, and responsibility. You're not just watching a story unfold, you're feeling the pressure alongside the characters. And that pressure builds with every scene. By the time it ends, you're not relieved in the usual way. You're changed. Because this wasn't just an adventure. It was a lesson in survival, sacrifice, and the harsh reality that even the smallest lives can face the biggest dangers. And for many, it was far more intense than they were ever ready for. Watership Down, 1978. Nothing about this looks dangerous at first. Rabbits, soft animation, a gentle countryside setting that feels calm and inviting. But that illusion doesn't last long, because beneath that peaceful surface lies one of the most unexpectedly violent animated films many children have ever seen. Blood, panic, desperation. These rabbits don't just run, they fight, they suffer, and they die. And the film doesn't look away. It shows the chaos, the fear, the brutal struggle for survival in a way that feels almost too real. For kids expecting something light, something comforting, this shift is jarring. It breaks the expectation that animation equals safety. And once that illusion is broken, it doesn't come back. What makes it even more disturbing is how serious everything feels. There's no humor to soften the impact, no exaggerated cartoon logic to create distance. It's grounded, almost documentary-like, in its approach to life and death. And that realism is what leaves a mark, because it forces young viewers to confront something they weren't prepared for, the idea that even the most innocent-looking worlds can be harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. It's not just shocking, it's disorienting. And for many, it changed how they viewed animated films forever. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, 1988. It feels playful from the start. Bright colors, exaggerated characters, a world where cartoons and humans exist side by side. Everything about it suggests fun, chaos, and harmless comedy. And for most of the film, that's exactly what it delivers. Until one moment changes everything. A small, squeaky cartoon shoe, innocent, harmless, is picked up and slowly lowered into a vat of toxic liquid. It struggles, it cries, and then it's gone, completely erased. For a child, this isn't just surprising. It's deeply unsettling, because cartoons aren't supposed to die. They're supposed to bounce back, to be indestructible. That's the rule. And this scene breaks that rule in the most disturbing way possible. But it doesn't stop there. The villain himself becomes something far more terrifying than expected, revealing a twisted, almost nightmarish presence hiding beneath a comedic exterior. And suddenly, the film doesn't feel as safe anymore. It feels unpredictable. Because if something that small, that innocent, can be destroyed so easily, what else can happen? That question lingers, and it changes how you experience the rest of the movie. What started as light-hearted fun becomes something darker, something more uncertain. And that shift is what stays with you long after it ends. Gremlins, 1984. It starts with something irresistibly safe. A small, wide-eyed creature, soft fur, gentle sounds. The kind of character designed to instantly win over any child watching. And for a while, that illusion holds. The rules seem simple. Keep it dry, don't expose it to bright light, and never feed it after midnight. But the moment those rules break, everything collapses. What follows isn't just chaos, it's a complete tonal shift into something far darker than anyone expected. These once cute creatures transform into snarling, destructive forces, tearing through a quiet town with a level of cruelty that feels wildly out of place. They don't just cause trouble, they enjoy it, and that's what makes them disturbing. There's a sense of intention behind their actions, a twisted intelligence that turns playful mischief into something almost malicious. And then comes the moment that truly blindsides younger viewers, a quiet, emotional monologue about Christmas that reveals a deeply tragic backstory. Suddenly, this isn't just a creature feature. It's something heavier, something layered with grief and darkness that doesn't belong in a family film. For kids, this creates a strange emotional conflict. You don't know whether to laugh, to feel scared, or to feel sad. And that confusion lingers, because the film never fully returns to safety. Once that darkness is introduced, it stays, and it changes everything you thought you were watching. Poltergeist, 1982. It was presented like a typical suburban story, a normal family, a comfortable home, a safe environment that mirrors everyday life. And that's exactly why it works so effectively, because it takes something familiar and slowly turns it into something terrifying. At first, the disturbances feel almost playful. Objects move on their own. Strange occurrences that might even seem amusing. But that sense of curiosity doesn't last. It escalates. Quickly, the television becomes a portal, a child disappears. And suddenly, the house itself feels alive, hostile, unpredictable, and impossible to escape. What makes this film especially traumatic for younger viewers is how it invades the idea of home. This isn't some distant haunted castle or abandoned building. It's a bedroom, a living room, a closet, spaces that are supposed to feel safe. And once those spaces are corrupted, the fear follows you beyond the screen. The infamous clown doll scene alone is enough to embed itself into memory, transforming something ordinary into a symbol of dread. But the real impact goes deeper than individual scares. It's the realization that danger doesn't always exist somewhere far away. Sometimes it's right where you feel most secure. And that idea, once planted, doesn't fade easily. It lingers in the quiet moments, long after the movie ends. E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, 1982. At its core, this is a story about friendship, about connection, about a bond between a lonely child and a being from another world. And for much of the film, it carries that warmth beautifully. There's wonder in the small moments, the quiet interactions, the sense of discovery, the feeling that something magical is unfolding. But then the tone shifts, gradually at first, and then all at once. E.T. begins to weaken, the color drains from him, the energy disappears, and suddenly the story takes on a weight that feels far heavier than expected. For a child, watching something so gentle, so innocent, slowly fade away is deeply unsettling. It's not loud, it's not violent, but it's emotional in a way that cuts deeper than fear. The sterile environment of the government facility, the coldness of the adults, the sense of helplessness, it all builds into a moment that feels almost too real, because it mirrors something children rarely confront so directly: loss. The possibility that someone you care about might not come back. And even though the film eventually offers hope, that middle section leaves a lasting mark. It introduces a kind of sadness that doesn't simply disappear. It lingers, quietly reshaping how you experience the rest of the story. And for many, it was the first time a family film felt genuinely heartbreaking. The Dark Crystal, 1982. Nothing about it prepares you for what it really is. On the surface, it looks like pure fantasy, elaborate creatures, handcrafted worlds, and the kind of visual imagination that suggests wonder, mystery, and escape. It seems like the sort of film that invites children into a magical realm. But almost immediately, that promise begins to unravel. The moment the Skeksis appear, the atmosphere changes. Their bodies feel wrong. Their movements are stiff, decayed, almost corpse-like. Their voices scrape through scenes like broken metal. They do not feel like ordinary villains. They feel diseased, ancient, and cruel in a way that is deeply unsettling. And that discomfort only grows as the film reveals what kind of world this really is. A world already damaged, already dying, where corruption is not a threat on the horizon, but the reality of everyday existence. That is what makes The Dark Crystal so haunting for younger viewers. This is not a bright fantasy where danger is balanced by warmth and relief. It is a cold, fragile world filled with unease. Even the heroes do not bring comfort in the usual sense. They feel vulnerable, small, and often overwhelmed by the darkness around them. There is very little humor to release the tension, and very little softness to reassure the audience that everything will be all right. Instead, the film commits fully to its eerie tone, and that commitment creates a constant sense of pressure. Children are not simply watching a scary moment and then moving on. They are living inside an atmosphere that never fully relaxes. And then come the most disturbing images of all, the scenes of essence being drained, life literally extracted from a living being, leaving behind something weak, empty, and hollow. That is not just frightening. It is deeply uncomfortable on a level many children cannot even explain at the time. It creates a sense of violation rather than simple fear. And that is why the film lingers. It doesn't rely on jump scares or quick shocks. It settles into memory like a strange dream that never fully leaves. For many, The Dark Crystal was the first time fantasy stopped feeling safe and started feeling like a place that could consume you. Return to Oz, 1985. If the original Wizard of Oz represented childhood wonder, Return to Oz felt like the moment that wonder turned against you. This is not the Oz people remembered as colorful, musical, and comforting. This is Oz after something has gone wrong. The familiar landmarks are still there, but they feel drained of life, as if the magic has rotted from the inside out. The yellow brick road is cracked and broken. The Emerald City is silent and abandoned. The atmosphere is colder, harsher, almost funereal. And from the opening scenes, the film carries a tone that tells you this is no safe return to a beloved fantasy. Something is deeply wrong. And the film wants you to feel that instability before it ever explains it. What makes Return to Oz so traumatic for children is the way it weaponizes familiarity. It takes a world associated with safety and turns it into a nightmare version of itself. That alone is disturbing. But then the film introduces the Wheelers, laughing, shrieking figures with unnatural body movements that feel chaotic and impossible to predict. They don't move like people, and they don't behave like ordinary fantasy villains. They feel like creatures pulled out of a child's worst dream. And then comes Princess Mombi, a character made unforgettable by her collection of interchangeable heads. The image is so bizarre, so calmly horrifying, that it lodges in memory instantly. It is not loud horror. It is quiet, controlled. A surreal horror. And that can be even worse for a child because it leaves no clear rules for what is possible. That is the film's real power. It does not simply scare you with isolated moments. It creates a whole world where nothing feels stable. There is no musical comfort, no reassuring rhythm, no familiar structure to hold on to. Even the quieter scenes feel tense, as if danger is always waiting just outside the frame. For children expecting magic, that tonal betrayal hits hard. Because this is not a story about returning home to something comforting. It is about discovering that something once safe can become strange, empty, and threatening. And once a film teaches you that lesson, it changes how you see fantasy forever. For many viewers, Return to Oz was not just creepy. It was the film that made Oz itself feel haunted. For the NeverEnding Story, 1984. It begins exactly the way a child wants a fantasy to begin, with escape. A lonely boy opens a book, and suddenly the world expands into something limitless. Strange creatures, vast landscapes, ancient forces, and the intoxicating promise that imagination can carry you somewhere bigger than ordinary life. Everything about the NeverEnding Story invites wonder. It feels like an adventure built out of childhood dreams, the kind of film that suggests anything is possible if you are brave enough to believe. And for a while, that is exactly what it is. It gives you beauty, scale, and mystery. It gives you a hero to follow and a world worth getting lost in. Then it changes. Quietly at first, and then all at once. The moment that defines the film is not loud, explosive, or traditionally horrifying. That is exactly why it hurts so deeply. The swamp of sadness arrives, and suddenly the story slows down. The movement becomes heavy. The mood darkens. And then Artax begins to sink. It is not fast enough to feel unreal. It is not stylized enough to feel distant. For children, that kind of helplessness can be devastating. It introduces a truth many are not ready to face. Sometimes loss happens even when someone loves you, fights for you, and refuses to give up. That realization changes the emotional contract of the film. After Artax sinks, the world of Fantasia no longer feels fully safe. The adventure does not disappear, but innocence does. And once that innocence is broken, every moment that follows carries more weight. That is why this film stayed with so many people for decades. It was not simply sad, it was a turning point. A family fantasy suddenly became a lesson in despair, loss, and emotional reality. And once children felt that in a movie, they never forgot it. And maybe that's why these movies never really left us. They didn't just entertain, they crossed a line we didn't know existed. They showed us fear, loss, and darkness. Far earlier than expected. So the question is, were they mistakes? Or were they the reason we never forgot them? Because once you've seen these scenes, childhood movies never feel the same again.